Hi, friends. I am Jen Johnson, and I love to talk about chronic pain. That might sound odd. I get it. But when we begin to understand the brain's role in producing chronic pain and structural pain, then oftentimes it can give us a lot of hope for the future. Today, I get to be a guest on Clare Backhouse's podcast called Nutrition with Love. And we're going to go back to the basics and talk about what pain is. We're going to talk about my story, how to rule out structural pain, and then move into a diagnosis of mind body and how to start the process of healing. So I hope you enjoy, and I will see you guys next week. This podcast is audio only, so I will have a background image, and will still be producing this on my YouTube channel and on my podcasts. Follow me on Instagram for tips for every day. My website is thoughtbythoughthealing.com. And if you want to follow me on YouTube, subscribe, share this podcast with people who it might help. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Welcome to the Nutrition with Love podcast, and thank you for joining me. I'm Clare Backhouse, qualified practitioner in nutrition and lifestyle medicine. And if you'd like to ditch the stress and obligation around improving your health and get some informed encouragement instead, then you've come to exactly the right place. And you can expect some extra encouragement today because I am joined by a guest who has so much hope and experience to share about chronic pain. Plus, she's going to introduce us to a whole area of research that I think may be very surprising to many, if not most of you. Jennifer Johnson is a mind-body pain coach based in the States, in Seattle, and whose pain journey started 14 years ago. And she now works with clients on chronic pain. I recently discovered Jen's work through a fellow nutritionist who recommended her podcast, which is Thought by Thought Healing. I was already very excited about mind-body pain research, but I'd noticed that several of my clients found the research hard to appreciate and benefit from. I was so pleased to encounter Jen's approach, which is so easy to connect with, informed by her experience as both patient and practitioner in the area of chronic pain. So Jen, welcome to Nutrition with Love. I'm thrilled you're here.
Oh, Claire, thank you so much for having me. I'm just honored to be here. Thank you.
Feelings mutual. I am so excited about your work because I think it's so little understood by so many people. It's about chronic pain, but I understand that it's relevant to particular kinds of pain. Maybe not people who've had an injury 2 weeks ago, but it's a different kind. Would you be willing to share what kinds of pain you mainly work on?
Yeah, absolutely. In general, if people have had a recent injury, I'm not part of that picture. At that point in time in somebody's journey, they should be going to the doctor and going to physical therapy and working through the recovery of that injury. What I tend to work on is with people who have had a chronic pain symptom or many other types of symptoms that have lasted like 3 to 6 months longer or after an injury, or oftentimes, and I would actually say the majority of my clients have pain that was not preceded by an accident or an injury. Like they woke up and their back hurts or their wrist hurt or something that did not come from hurting themselves.
Yeah. So the kind of thing where they've been to the doctor, they've been given the all clear, but the pain is still persisting and it's a bit mysterious.
Yes, that's a good disclaimer there. So I actually don't work with people until they have had a doctor say, there's nothing wrong or we can't find anything wrong with you. That's where we want to start attending to the brain and saying, what's going on here? Why is my nervous system or why is my pain here when there's nothing wrong with the body part? Like a doctor has done a good analysis of what's going on. They've done lab tests and maybe an MRI, and there's nothing to be found. So that's where I enter the picture because, we do not want me or any other mind body medicine coach working on something that needs structural and medical attention.
Yeah, brilliant. And I mean, but there are so many people who suffer from exactly that kind of pain you describe. And you were just saying to me before the podcast that how long your wait list has become. Just to give the listeners a sense of like the variety of types of chronic pain that people might experience, I wondered if you'd share a bit about your journey, because you've been quite open on your podcast about the different types of pain and things you were encountering.
Yes. So this is a good and interesting point you bring up. So many of my clients come to me and they want to have read a healing story that includes exactly and all of their symptoms. And while that can be validating and helpful, the brain and nervous system are crazy cool, powerful when it comes to the threat response in our brain body. So yeah, let me share some of mine, but also for those of you listening, do know that the brain can produce literally any symptom in the body that an injury can also cause. So some of the symptoms that I experienced were all over body pain. And I do mean that. I mean from headaches to neck pain, back pain. My primary was foot pain, which was very acute foot pain. It felt very, very structural. In my head, there's no way that my foot pain could have been a hypervigilant stress nervous system response of my brain. But that was one. IBS, I was diagnosed with SIBO, so small intestine bacteria overgrowth, which should give you a clue that I had a ton of stomach IBS, even like stabbing nerve pain in my stomach that also felt very
Felt digestive.
structural.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even now it's like looking back, it's fascinating to realize my brain was producing pain, acute pain like that.
Yeah.
Insomnia was kind of another one of the an intense symptom that I call it a symptom that I had. I was also diagnosed as like fibromyalgia, central sensitization. People said, well, it must be her high arches. Oh, carpal tunnel. So I had really bad wrist pain. I could barely like hold a book open. That's just to name a few of them.
Gosh, a few.
A
That's a
few.
lot. That's quite a list.
Yes.
Wow.
And it definitely stole my entire life away. So I did the traditional route of going to many specialists because you can hear about the variety of different symptoms that I had, which had me in different doctors' offices doing different lab research, all to find very little. I mean, I was diagnosed with things, but they didn't explain the cause. So I had very real experienced symptoms, but why? Why was I experiencing these things? That part was not answered.
What you're mentioning there is so useful and interesting, because when someone says, or when a qualified practitioner says you have fibromyalgia, we sometimes we think, oh, that is a reality of who I am and what I am, as opposed to it's a description of what's happening. It's just a description.
Yeah.
It's just a more medical description of what you just said in layman's terms. So I feel like that's a really valuable point, that certain things get described, but that doesn't mean that the cause has been located and is going to get worked on. You're given these diagnoses, but no sense of like, oh, well, this is entirely solvable by X. It was like, you've got this, and oh dear.
And then that ends up putting your brain into even more fear mode or more fixing or trying to focus on and catastrophizing and all these fear thoughts that I didn't even identify as fear. Like, I think something that's interesting is in the very beginning when myself and or my clients are given a diagnosis label, initially there's a relief. You're like, oh, I know what's quote wrong with me. I feel better. And we actually have a little bit of placebo um, experience in that of reduction of stress in the body because I now know what's wrong with me.
Yeah.
But the
And you've been
problem,
heard, perhaps, as well. Yeah.
That, yes, you now have validation for everything you're experiencing and all the people who are in your life, um, in loving capacities or not, that now you're seeing, oh, she has fibromyalgia or she has central sensitization. I actually remember, I remember a friend of mine coming to me after I'd been diagnosed with central sensitization and him talking to one of his neurologist friends. And he said, oh, I asked my friend about central sensitization, and he said that is in fact a real thing. And I remember thinking, well, of course it's, what are you saying? Of course it's a real thing. Are you telling me that you haven't thought my symptoms were real? Like what is happening here? So there was a temporary validation that I got from getting this diagnosis. And so while helpful in the beginning, it then led to, well, then I'm stuck with this forever. And that's scary. And it's also scary for your nervous system, your subconscious brain, which in the end leads to more symptoms.
You've touched on these really interesting points that I think are going to be really new for everyone. Well, a lot of people listening. What the connection with the brain and pain,
Yep.
the nervous system and fear, and the relevance of all of those for creating pain. In fact, would you ever be willing just to summarize that research that you came across, that you've written about very eloquently on your website, about how it actually changed, and your podcast as well, how it really changed your life? But would you be willing just to give us a little sort of potted headlines of that research that was so important?
If I was to put it as short as possible, this is what I would say. Pain is a perceived danger signal. Now let me unpack that. What research has found is that all pain, and I'm going to say that again, all pain is produced in the brain. So you cut your finger, you touch a hot stove. The easiest to understand example is you touch a hot stove, and your little receptors in your finger send a message to the brain that says there has been a change in temperature. And your brain says, let's interpret that. Is that good or bad? And it looks around, says, bad. There's a stove right there. It sends pain. Why? Because it's protecting you from further danger. Because if you leave your hand there, you are going to injure yourself more. So in that case, it is a structural, external source of danger that your brain is saying, threat, do something, make a change. This is not safe. So that's the I don't know, the structural part of pain in the brain. But then my favorite research to look at is, I think it was 1995, maybe 1985, in the British Journal. There was a gentleman who jumped off of a second story of a construction site, I believe. The details I may be wrong on, but the research is solid here. And he had a nail up through his shoe. He was in horrific pain. They took him to the hospital and had to put him on fentanyl. He was in that much pain from this nail through his boot, like he's got a hardy construction boot on and it's up and through there. And when they finally got that boot off him, they found that the nail had gone in between his toes, meaning there was zero damage. But his brain had seen it and turned on the threat signal of pain based on an emotional response to perceived danger.
Yeah.
And from there has been a lot of research around, oh, wait a second, if the brain's producing pain and there's no structural damage, what is happening here? And now there have been other fMRI research, and lots of doctors and neuroscientists are on this because it is changing our understanding of the brain, the importance of understanding the brain's perception of danger. So for me, when I realized that, I started looking at, well, like, how much danger externally am I in? Like, am I being physically hurt somewhere? And it was no, but how much danger was in me was intense. There was a lot of emotional stress in my life that was actually activating threat, a perceived threat of experiences that I had in life that were real and were worth validating more than validation of some diagnosis. So I think that's an important thing that I'm guessing it would be helpful for your listeners to hear, is that my pain was very, very real.
Yeah.
And I don't know why in our culture, for some reason, validating structural damage is more understandable than understanding the injuries that we have experienced from emotional causes and hurt from other people in our lives, or even misconceptions that we have.
Yeah. It sounds as though the brain might pick up threat messages from trauma, past or present, that has happened or is happening, or other issues going on that they aren't physical, they're emotional or social or so on. But then there's also potentially, if there was previous pain, the brain might take some time to recognize that that previous pain is no longer needed. For example, am I right in thinking that an injury, a very serious injury that was very painful and healed up, but then and was structurally sound, could potentially be the source of more pain if your brain still thinks that you're in threat from the injury?
So you just brought up two really important points. Let's go with the one you're talking about right now first. So yes, when you break your back, your brain delivers pain. It's still structure. It's still the brain generating the pain. You have a change. This time there's a mechanical change in your back. Something breaks. The receptor send a message to your brain. Your brain produces pain. Well, that's a neural circuit that is very real in your brain when you have that happen. Well, later on, your back actually heals. But if you are triggered by concern later on, let's say a few years later, or months later, or 20 years later, and something feels similar to that time, your brain can reactivate those neural circuits, and boom, now you are in back pain that's literally the same place. There's no revived damage in the back at this point in time. There might be tension. Maybe you're holding your body in tension, and body in tension is an indication that you're perceiving threat. So again, it comes back to perceived danger pain. That brings up the research also around phantom limb pain. So if you look at phantom limb pain, people who do not have limbs are experiencing pain in a body part that does not exist any longer. One other little evidence of proof that is the brain that's producing pain for very real reasons. And going back to your first point that was really good is that, yes, if we experience trauma or chronic stress in our childhood or adult life, your brain can learn that life is not very safe. You need a little bit more protection than you were given. And so your brain can become hypervigilant. And when the brain is hypervigilant, it is priming you to perceive and look for danger because that's wise. So there's so much compassion and understanding that's needed in this work. And also a dose of you're empowered to change this. You were in danger. Your brain rightfully learned to protect you, and now there's no need for it. So our brain gets in patterns of protection, which is wired into the brain as habits, and your brain starts to predict that it's going to need pain, meaning it's going to need protection.
Yeah.
And that can be, this is such a paradigm shift for people.
It's immense.
Yes. Yeah. So for example, with me, my feet hurt one day really bad, and I was going through a time of a lot of perceived shame in my life from external sources. And I thought that I had overused my feet. So I blamed it on, I used my feet too much. I had gone to a dance convention and had danced for like 12 hours. And I was like, I probably just, injured my feet. And instead I missed the fact at that point in time in my life, I was experiencing a lot of judgment. So I blamed it on walking. And then my brain started to realize that it needed to protect me from walking. So every time I walked, my brain turned on that defense mechanism or that fear mechanism. And now I had a conditioned response to using my feet. And I had to break that conditioned response through neuroplasticity, through understanding that our brains can change. So even though my brain wired itself to perceive walking as a threat, Therefore, I experienced very real pain. I had to change my brain and using plasticity to change my brain's relationship with walking and
Yeah.
shoes and a bunch of other things in my life that were conditioned pain responses. Again, very real pain responses. I had somebody tell me once that my pain wasn't real. Woo!
You must have wanted to punch them.
And it was somebody that I love very much. Like you
Yeah.
can't see me, our hands right now, but I'm kind of wringing my hands together of like, ooh, okay, that was really hurtful. My pain was real. It just wasn't what we traditionally think of what pain is, because pain is not what we used to think it was. It's not
Yeah.
always indicative of a structural issue. And that's true of stomach symptoms too. Like right now we're primarily talking about my feet, but I did the same thing with my feet or my stomach. I had so much stomach pain that I started doing all these elimination diets, and I literally taught myself that certain food groups were bad for me by hypervigilantly watching my body's reaction to them, and kind of created a fear of certain foods, and therefore had like sensitivities to food that I had to change
Yeah.
my brain's relationship with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is also, it's such a brilliant paradigm shift for so many people.
Yeah.
Plus, I love the way it adds this like extra tool, as it well, I'm seeing it from my perspective as an extra crucial tool, extra
Yeah.
perspective that's so needed within the world of nutrition and lifestyle medicine. For example, stress can genuinely mechanically cause digestive symptoms, because when you're in the fight or flight mode, you can have less blood going to the digestive system, causing symptoms like reflux or bloating or whatever. But as you say, it's possible to have learned responses, and it's possible to have symptoms that feel absolutely real, and yet they're generated by this protection, this brain being in self-protection mode. And I think that's so important to remember, especially for people who are dealing with IBS that really, really won't respond to any. For example, you mentioned SIBO, people who try every possible treatment and it's not going anywhere. Just to bear in mind the research that you're referencing and what your approach to pain is actually, it could be exactly what people need to hear. And I think just to recap, I think some of the paradigm shifts we're covering are like the brain is the source of all pain, regardless of whether it's recent structural damage or if it's past damage that's being kind of revived. The diversity of causes of pain, that yes, it could be structural damage, it might be apparently come out of nowhere, but be related to stress or trauma that you have no idea about just yet.
Yep.
And the question of the brain becoming hypervigilant. And then the hopeful side of the neuroplasticity, the fact that the brain can relearn, which is just so exciting. Would you be willing to share a little bit about your recovery and how you went from this chronic pain?
Yes. So I think that I'm actually working right now on creating a workbook. So this is a good time for you to ask me an outline or a
I like the
timeline of
sound of it.
healing. Yeah. So the first step is to learn pain neuroscience. The second step is to rule in that that's you and to believe it. So this work is interesting because you do have to believe that there's nothing wrong with me. There was nothing wrong with my body, my stomach, my digestive system, my feet. There was nothing wrong with my brain. There was nothing wrong with my nervous system. But my symptoms told a very, very different story. They told a story that everything was wrong with me. So the first thing is learn. If you're in that place, I would say my website, which is thoughtbythoughthealing.com, I have a tab called resources. And in that tab is a lot of videos, hopefully palatable for you, depending on how much pain you're in. Some of them are cartoon related. And so they're really easy to watch. And if you're really into the science of things, there's some nerdy things that you can click on and research away. Because learning and understanding and believing there's nothing wrong with you is part of getting you out of the fear pain cycle or the fear stomach cycle. So learn, believe. You want to rule it in. You want to look for evidence Did your symptoms come on at a time that you were in stress, or that maybe there was something that felt a little bit too similar to something in childhood? Or maybe there was too much on your plate, or you started worrying about what other people thought of you for some reason at that point in time in your life. We're looking at, what was happening in your time of life that might have been causing a stress response in the brain and nervous system. Giveaways for the symptoms are that maybe they move around, or they increase and decrease at a certain times of the day, or always when you move in a certain way, when there's no structural damage. So there's also on my website, there's something called the pain test. If your symptom is not pain, but it's something else, I don't know, bloatation or insomnia, fatigue, you can replace the word pain and just take that test and see how many of those things you say yes to. The more you say yes, the more probable it is that it's mind-body syndrome. So we've got learn, we've got believe, and then we call it the work. And the work is you have to become your own leader to basically redirect the threat responses of your brain. And I categorize those things in 4 ways. I see the primary cause of threat response being, one is that you fear the symptom itself. So that the symptom, you experience it, and it's scary. So you run to the doctor, you try to fix it again. I don't know, you stay home and you don't go out with your friends, things like that. So the fear pain cycle is one. The second is repressed emotions. So we often have things that have happened to us and we didn't have the tools. We did not know how to handle it. We live in a broken world. I have a strong faith in God, so I approach this on my own podcast from that perspective.
Yeah.
And so I think understanding that I live in a broken world with people who make intentional mistakes and accidental mistakes, and they both have an effect on how safe I feel in the world. And that's what we're talking about here, is how safe do we feel? And if we don't feel very safe, our nervous system is going to pay for that and carry that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
a big part of the journey is, I think, for me, is journaling in a way that is, I'm going to say, explicit or honest or messy, and letting our hurt out on a piece of paper. And then understanding, is there a way for me to come above this? Is there a way that God's empowering me to say, I don't have to live victim to this situation anymore, and here's how.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
In fact, I was going to ask you about your approach, because you're unusual in your approach, in that you've got a Trinitarian spirituality. It's front and center. You discuss it very openly in your podcast. Although I know that you work with people of all faiths and none.
Definitely.
But I was wondering, what is it like for you when you begin with the presence of God? What is different about the way that you do your pain work? What's different? How does it feel different?
Yeah, good question. I can answer that in so many ways.
Yeah, probably there's
And
hundreds of ways. Yeah.
going back to the premise, if our nervous system is in a threat response and we are in need of safety, if you have, and you're right, I work with people who are not, who don't share a faith or a belief with me around a Trinitarian God. I call myself a Christian. I know that has different connotations for every single person. I have found that for me, part of my, so part of this is changing your symptom story, learning and believing, learning about pain science and believing it leads you to changing your narrative around what your pain was. So I used to say, I overused my feet, blah, blah, blah. Well, now I say, I went through a time of stress. I was also struggling in my understanding of who God was, and which is going to bring us to your question. And I had a bully in my life. I was experiencing a lot of judgment, etc. So this is now that is the symptom story that I tell, instead of what had happened to me, quote unquote, structurally.
Yeah.
And so when I am bringing God into, I don't know, into this healing journey, what I'm saying is God is good, and he is big, and he's for me, and he's on my side. And when that happens, I get to trust him in the things that I can't control, the things that were outside of my control. I get to trust him when I'm learning I need to create boundaries that I didn't have before. I can trust him when I realize my own self-narrative, the way I talk about myself, is tearing me down and is actually putting my nervous system in a threat. And I get to say, God, who did you make me to be? How do I live into that today instead of this fear, depression that has so much say over who I think I am?
Mm.
So when I'm bringing God in, I am saying, who do you say I am? Because this pain is telling me a whole different story. And I want to know who I actually am, grounded in you. When my identity is in Christ, who am I? And that empowers my brain to know I am safe because of who he says I am. And he's got my back. So does that answer your question? I mean, I could
Yeah.
go a million
No,
directions,
no,
but that's
no. I
one
can
way.
understand because I think anything that's so central is hard to talk about. Like the more central something is to one's life, almost the
Uh-huh.
harder it is to articulate it. But I think
Yeah.
what really strikes me about what you're saying is that you're accessing God as your primary source of love, and that love is in complete sort of opposition to any threat fear response, and allowing that. Am I hearing that right? That sort of
Yeah.
presence allows you to sort of relax almost. Okay, I believe that there's a loving power that's for me in this situation, or that am I getting that correctly?
Yes, and if your watchers could see my face, you would know that I'm grinning right now because yes, that's a beautiful way of putting it. In this work, compassion towards yourself is really, really important. When God is love and we know that he has taken all our shame from us, and that's one of the promises he gives us, that empowers us to be able to look at our own story, our own narrative with a compassionate lens that says, wow, you've been through a lot. How can I lean into God and love on my nervous system instead of judging it for the state that it's in? Because your nervous system, your pain is your body is actually asking for a change. My body was asking for me to stand up for myself and to
Yeah.
know that I had worth. And because I'm a Christian, I had worth in God, and that empowered me to stand up for myself and then to set some boundaries, but also to understand how I was also operating some personality traits that were defensive in nature because in the past I had need defending
Yeah.
and being protective,
That's
protecting myself.
so, in what you're saying about compassion there is really powerful, like showing compassion to your nervous system.
Yes,
And that
absolutely.
just that sense of like compassion doesn't, you could look at your situation both externally and internally, kind of warts and all, and have compassion. And that's a very, very powerful thing to be able to do, I think. I love hearing it. We're just drawing to the close in just a moment, but I wanted to emphasize something that really, really struck me about your journey and what you're describing about your clients, that possibly when people experience unexplained chronic pain, it might be an invitation to uncover a bigger healing than you thought you needed originally.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
it sounds like the journeys you undertake with your clients are like really quite profound.
Yeah. And I
It's
think
very lovely to hear.
it's kind of like a scab versus a wound. If we're trying to heal the body part that's, I'm going to say acting up. I might regret
Mhm.
that choice of words later, but that is experiencing symptoms, and we're just picking the scab over and over again. It doesn't help anything. But if we can say, "Wow, there is a way that I'm hurting here. There's a wound underneath here. It might be one big one, or it might be a myriad of things, which is my story. What it doesn't need is me shaming my body and being like, get it together, stop stressing out. It needs God's love or self-compassion or a more gentle approach of saying, I see you. I see that something is hurting, and let me take the time out of my too busy of a life to actually attend to why I am in. Some people will resonate with fear mode, and some people will push back against that because they'll experience it more as like frustration or anger, but they're kind of two sides of the same coin. And so you're right, the compassion part of it. You bringing up, like, my clients, just reminds me of this one client that I had, and this is a little off topic, but important to note. I think a lot of people feel like if they're older in years,
Yeah.
that maybe this doesn't work for them, that maybe it's just their aging that has caused this pain. And I have a client who, she must have been like 75 and started doing this work after years and years and years and years of pain. And as she started working through and journaling and understanding what in ways she was hurt, she was able to reverse her pain at 75. So this is for everybody. Neuroplasticity, the changing of the brain, the ability to change the neural circuits in our brain is available for everybody. So if anybody's watching, needs that bit of hope, there you go.
Oh, that was a very welcome story, and so encouraging. Especially there's no like age limit to this. That's so joyful. And Jen, would you be willing to share where can people find you best? And tell us where we can find you.
My website is thoughtbythoughthealing.com, and my podcast is Thought by Thought Healing. I do have a wait list right now. I'm working on trying to create like a video program that would be more palatable in cost and also available to more people. But you can reach out to me on my website, get on my wait list, or follow me on Instagram too. I try to post little like daily either science bits, depending on, because everybody's in a different part of their journey of whether the learn and believe part or the work of attending to our nervous system. Everybody's in one of those places. So I try to post little things every day that are like encouragement along the way of healing for people.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, Jen. That was truly nutrition with love. So it's amazing.
It's an honor. Thank you for having me.